Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 627, and today's date is March 27th, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. Now Providing Lethal Aid to Ukraine, Major Offensive Soon to Follow. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that Greece and the ECB, they're still in discussions. Actually, we're in a holding pattern. Nothing has actually happened at this point. But there is one thing happening. The people in Greece, the businesses in Greece, they're nervous. They're scared. They don't know what's going to happen. And we see already that depositors, they're just taking their money out. Deposits have declined in the Greek banks by around 7.6 billion euros in February. We see that private and business deposits have dropped by 140.5 billion euros in February, which is the lowest level in 10 years. And I believe that these depositors are going to continually take out their money because, again, they don't know what's going to happen. And they don't want to be Cyprus. And if you don't know what Cyprus is, that is a bail-in. This is what the Cypriot people experienced back in 2013, where all of a sudden they went to sleep on Friday, they woke up on Saturday, and the banks were closed. They couldn't get their money out. Capital controls were in effect. And the government was out there telling them that, yeah, we're going to take about 8 to 10% of your money, and you won't be able to take out your money or transfer it. And what actually happened is they ended up taking about 47% of their money, and they were under capital controls for over a year. And the Greek people have seen this. They know it's a possibility, and they are making sure that none of their money is in the banks. And we know that these bail-in documents, especially the one in the United States, which was created with the help of the Bank of England in the United Kingdom, that was created before the bail-ins in Cyprus. That one was created back in November, December of 2012. So they already were preparing for what was coming. And then all of a sudden, the Eurozone, New Zealand, Switzerland, Canada, they all started taking on the bail-in document. And we can see that all of these countries are ready because as they know, and as we know, when this collapse comes, the governments are not going to bail them out. They're going to have to look inward and take the money from the people because there is no money left anywhere. And this is the only way they can keep these banks afloat. Now we see the Greek deputy finance minister. He is ready and he is prepared for a rift with Europe. He's ready to go. And we're going to have to wait to see how this all turns out to see if anything really comes about on this whole entire issue, if things really go in the direction that we think it's going to go. And I do believe, and I really think that Greece is looking to exit because they've been visiting with Russia, and there are certain signs like they've created a drachma, and they know if they go to Russia that they will remove the food ban, they will help with the economic situation, they will not put them continuously into debt and asking them to impose austerity. Because again, this is what the Syriza party ran on, and we can see that they're leaning towards that direction. But we'll have to wait and see and watch what happens. Now, out in London, we see the number of people sleeping on the streets has risen by over 1/3 in the past year, twice the national average. So why is all of this happening? Well, it's because the economic system is completely falling apart. And we're starting to see this in every single country where there are more and more homeless people. They can't pay for these expensive homes or pay for the expensive rent. And a lot of these people don't have the proper jobs and the proper income coming in. Data from the Department of Communities and Local Government found that levels of homelessness in the capital rose by 37% between 2013 and 2014. The rest of the country also rises on averaging about 14%. We're seeing this here also in the United States. Those people who've lost their jobs, who only can find a part-time job, they can't support the way they used to live. So if they were in a place where they were making a certain amount of money, paying their rent, their mortgage, and they got something where they're making less money, they just can't support it. And eventually what happens is they either short sale, they foreclose, or they're kicked out of their apartment. And we see a lot more people sending up tent cities. We see a lot more people on the streets. And we can see that people are starting to wake up now and say, something is definitely wrong with this economy. I mean, the UMich consumer sentiment dropped once again. This is the second month in a row. For the first time since October 2013, the UMich consumer sentiment dropped for consecutive months. It printed at 93. They thought they were going to get around 95.4. But again, it seems like all their estimates are always completely off going forward. I mean, of course, they can manipulate everything, but everything can't be manipulated, because when we look at what's really going on, we see that, the unemployment doesn't make sense. People are starting to realize that the unemployment doesn't make sense. People are coming out and speaking out that these statistical numbers don't make sense. Under the surface, there are concerns with an increasing number of respondents noting that the household finance are worse than 5 years ago. So people are starting to say, wait a minute, I lost my job, I can't find one, I'm putting out a resume, or I have a job and I would like a new one making more money, I'm putting out my resume, I can't find that same job making the same amount of money. Forget about making more, I can't find the same job. And we can see that this is starting to spread. And where is this spreading? Well, we see it in retail. Stores are closing. People are getting laid off. We know that retail sales are way, way down. The holiday season was a complete bust. And a lot more people are out there saying that this is a bad time to buy a house or a car. And we can see that the government is trying to push anyone they possibly can into the housing market and into the automobile market. And they're accepting anyone that would like a house. I don't care. No credit, foreclosure, bankrupt, you have no job, makes no difference. You can buy a house. Oh, you don't even need money down. We'll even cover the closing costs, some of these banks are saying, and builders are making up the difference. They just want to keep the system going, and this is why they create these new programs. Yes, a lot of people look at it and say, this is my chance to purchase, and this is what happened back in 2007, 2008. And they went ahead and they purchased the house. A lot of them used the adjustable rate mortgage programs, where they were only paying the interest and not the principal at a very low interest rate, and then all of a sudden things started to change and the interest rate started to tick up, and this caused many, many problems. And then all of a sudden people started losing jobs. The same thing's going to occur once again. We're not out of the woods. Actually, at this point in time, things are much, much worse. Because what the government has been doing is they've been going with these statistical numbers and changing them to make you believe that we're in a recovery. So right now, the economy is much, 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 much worse than it was prior to 2008. And we're headed towards a major collapse scenario. And we can see by unemployment, GDP, inflation, they're continually manipulating all of these numbers. And we can see that the fourth quarter GDP is unchanged at 2.2%, way below the expectations. And then we take a closer look at what has really made up the GDP in 2014, the fourth quarter, the third quarter. And when we look closer at it, we see it was Obamacare. This is where people were spending their money. Obamacare was included in the GDP numbers to boost them up. In Q3 GDP, some were shocked to learn that the U.S. GDP posted a 5% surge, and that was due to Obamacare. And now in the fourth quarter, guess what? History has just repeated itself. Nothing has changed whatsoever. All those people that were saving money because the gas prices came down, it all went to healthcare. So does it sound like we have a robust economy if Obamacare was the biggest contributor to the GDP numbers? I mean, if we remove Obamacare, the GDP numbers would be low, would be way, way down, or probably in the negative area. But they included it. Why? To convince everyone that we're in a recovery. And I hate to say it, healthcare doesn't show that the economy is improving. It shows that people are spending money for air. Nothing. Because with Obamacare, the deductibles are very high. So you could be paying $500, $600, $700 every single month, and then you go to the doctor and you expect Obamacare to pay for that doctor's visit. No. You have a deductible of $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and you have to pay out of pocket until you reach that number. So this is definitely not a benefit to the people whatsoever. And if we look at this, we see that Obamacare was the biggest contributor on margin. We saw an unprecedented surge in total spending from $1.858 trillion to $1.871 trillion just between the second and final GDP revisions, a bump of $13.9 billion. So what does this tell us? It tells us this economy is dead in the water. It even gets better because the fourth quarter total spending on healthcare, that was the third quarter that I just mentioned, was a whopping $35.3 billion, an all-time record. Healthcare spending accounted for 40% of GDP. 40, almost half of GDP. The economy is in collapse at this point. We see that manufacturers are not producing. People are not going out to purchase. So manufacturers aren't producing. If manufacturers aren't producing, they don't need the raw material. And we can see that this is evident in the Baltic Dry Index. It is hovering around 596 points right now. If we look back a year ago when unemployment was much higher, and they're trying to convince us that the economy was much, much worse, the Baltic Dry Index was at 1412. Almost 3 times higher than it is today. Again, this does not show us that we're in a recovery. It shows us that the economy is doing worse and we're headed towards a collapse. Because it makes no sense if we go back last year, the year before that when unemployment was higher, and the holiday seasons were much better. Sales were much better. The economy has been getting worse and worse every single year, even though the government is telling us that it's getting better with their statistical manipulation. From what we're looking at, it makes more sense from what they're telling us that unemployment is much lower, GDP is much higher. It makes no sense. The system is falling apart. And of course they keep the stock market up there to convince us that that's the economy. Well, we understood and we've talked about it, that the stock market is completely rigged. We understand that the central banking system gives free money to the banks to invest in the stock market, not to loan out to people, to invest in the stock market, to pump it up. They have 0% interest rates on short-term loans where hedge funds and investment companies go in, they borrow the money, they pump the money into the stock market, the stocks go up, and then they sell off and they return the money with no interest whatsoever and they keep their profits. And we can see in the New York Post right now, the mainstream media, they're starting to acknowledge that yes, the stock market is rigged. This is not a real system anymore. And of course this was a conspiracy theory, and now it seems like not so much anymore. Actually, I've been noticing that a lot of these conspiracy theories are turning out to be the truth. So maybe we should call it conspiracy truth. And let the corporate media catch up to all of us that are talking about the truth. The New York Post, John Crudell, in his recent article seems to have made a stir, puncturing a favorite elite market meme. The market is going up because the economy is recovering, and we know this is completely false, fake, and phony. Crudell attributes markets, the ecstatic markets, to direct interference of the central banks and other interests and powerful parties. Ed Yardeni, a longtime Wall Street guru who isn't one of the clowns of the bunch, said flat out last week that the market was being propped up. These markets are all rigged, and I don't say that critically. I just say that factually. Yardeni's claim is the most basic one, that the Federal Reserve won't do anything that will upset Wall Street, and in fact is doing all it can to help the stock market. U.S. stock markets are not immune to direct manipulation. However, Crudell claims that during 2008, when the entire economy was unraveling at a rapid clip, phone logs he received show regular contact between the Treasury Secretary, Hank Paulson, and Wall Street banks such as Goldman Sachs. The phone calls and stock market rallies seem to have a relationship, he indicates. And we know for a fact the earning reports, how companies are doing, how companies are closing their stores, laying off people. It makes no sense that the stock market continually goes up. There's no rhyme or reason except for all this free money floating around. Ukraine is out there, and they are saying, and this is coming from the Ukraine parliament, they're looking at this and saying, wait a minute, the IMF is telling all these economies that they need to use their recipe for success to better the country and get the country back on its feet. And some of the people in Ukraine have analyzed the situation in 80 countries which adopted the IMF's recipe. The position of 34 of them deteriorated. About another 10 found themselves on the brink of default, while the remaining states tried to survive at least somehow. And this is coming from Ukraine. They should have done this before the entire coup d'etat. They should have done their research, and I believe that at that point in time, Yanukovych looked around and said, okay, Russia, EU, go with the private Western central banking system, or Russia. And he looked around saying, okay, Greece is in trouble, Cyprus is in trouble, Italy's in trouble, France is in trouble, the entire Eurozone is completely falling apart. Let me take a look at Russia. Ooh, everything's booming. They're starting, they're making deals with China, they're making deals with South America, they're on their way. Oh, okay, let's choose Russia. If the rest of the country would have been on board, they would have known this to be the case. And we've said this in the past reports. But we can see right now, a lot of these countries and a lot of these nations are starting to wake up and say, there is definitely something wrong. It seems like the central bank, actually, it's not even seems, the central bank places these countries into debt, period, destroys the economy. And their recipe for success is a recipe for disaster. And we can see that this is why all the allies of the United States decided to go with the Chinese-led infrastructure bank, because they understand this system is crashing. And of course we heard Washington say, yes, we will co-help the Chinese-led infrastructure bank, we will help out. And I said in the past, I go, now, this is all rhetoric, this is all words, this is not what they're really going to do. And we're starting to see some of what United States central bankers really want to do. They want to infiltrate the banking system and destroy it like they did here in the United States through Europe. They want to spread more and more debt. Because right now, Washington is questioning Beijing's latest restrictions limiting the sale of foreign technology to Chinese banks, claiming the measures would hurt global trade according to a filing with the World Trade Organization. They claim that China's new rules announced in December go beyond the usual practice for the regulation of information and communication technology equipment in the commercial banking sector. Chinese banks have a restriction on the use of foreign information technology. All foreign companies operating in China are also required to install Beijing-approved encryption and submit private source code for government inspection. Do you see why Washington, why the United States government central bankers are up in arms about this? Because it's an encryption system they can't break into. They can't get their hands on what's going on in the banking system. They can't manipulate anything. They can't bring it down. And they're angry because throughout the system here in Europe, the United States, they have back doors. They can get into the systems. They can spy on what's going on. And this is why they don't want encryption here in the United States. They want every single person to be completely open to them. Well, if you're going to do that, you might as well just leave your doors in your house open, leave your safe open, just lay out your money on your living room floor, and let them come in whenever they want, because that's what they're asking for. And they're very angry about this. And China is out there saying that no, we are basically following the law. We are doing what is expected of us. We're keeping our banking system safe and secure. And we can see this is the first step where the United States government central bankers are trying to get into their system. Because as we know throughout the United States and Europe, there's back doors everywhere. And this is why China and Russia decided, you know what? We're not going to be using the technology from the United States anymore because there's all back doors. They're not secure. And they can spy on us. And we can see that this is a major problem. Now, Russia, as we know, they created their own payment system. It's called Russia's National Payment Card System. And they're going to begin producing its own credit card, debit cards in December 2015, and plans to begin producing cards co-badged with Visa and MasterCard in 2016. As we know, Visa and MasterCard broke off from the United States government because they said, listen, we're going to lose a lot of business and we're not going along with these sanctions. So we're going to work with Russia right now and put the processing servers in their country. So we can see right now their system is going forward. Right now, there are 31 Russian banks that have been certified out of the almost 100 which will use the Visa payment system. Residents of Crimea and Sevastopol will gain access to the system later than the rest of the country, but expected to do so by the end of 2015. So they're moving forward, separating themselves from the private Western central bank system. If they decide to bring anything down, guess what? Their payment system is up and running. They have Visa, MasterCard service in their countries ready to go to process payments. Basically, they're de-dollarizing right now. Now, as we know, the United States government is continually spying on the American people. They actually admitted it. Well, they first lied about it when they were testifying in front of Congress. Then they admitted it, yes, we are spying. Then they said the president was out there saying that he's going to reel it all back in. And basically, he did absolutely nothing. Actually, it expanded. And it did not do anything but expand even further and further. And they're spying on more and more people. The government is becoming more and more secret. And Andrew Napolitano was out there. And he's saying that the state is spying on you right now, and he wants to know, where is the outrage? People should be up in arms, screaming and yelling. And I've said this many, many times. Eventually, when we have enough people woken up, we will have this outrage. But right now, people are so busy in their daily lives worrying about nonsense. They're not really seeing the big picture of what is coming. And he says, here is a short pop quiz. When Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed Congress earlier this month about the parameters of the secret negotiations between the United States and Iran over nuclear weapons and economic sanctions, how did he know what the negotiators were considering? Israel is not part of the negotiations. They're not part of the P5+1 talks. But yet, the Prime Minister presented them in detail. Now, we could have gotten this from Congress, but the question is, it's a form of spying. When Hillary Clinton learned that a committee of the U.S. House of Representatives had subpoenaed her emails as Secretary of State, she promptly destroyed half of them, about 33,000 of them. How did she know she could get away with it? Destruction of evidence, particularly government records, constitutes the crime of obstruction of justice. And when two judges were recently confronted with transcripts of conversations between known drug dealers, transcripts obtained without search warrants, and they asked the police who obtained them to explain their sources, how is it that the cops are allowed to refuse to answer this? The government has the same obligation to tell the truth in a courtroom as any litigant. And in a criminal case, the government must establish that its acquisition of all its evidence was lawful. And we could see with the Stingray system, they're keeping that a secret. They don't want to produce the evidence whatsoever. And what they do is they create similar evidence that mimics the real evidence, but they don't want to give away how they got it. But that's not really evidence, because let me tell you, if any one of you were on trial or myself, I would want the evidence and where they got it from, because this is someone's life you're talking about. So what's going on here? Well, the government is spying and lying right now. When the president violates the Constitution and the Congress and courts do nothing to stop him, we have effectively amended the Constitution with a wink and a nod by consent. Without freedom, what are we? And we see that Congress is doing the same thing, not just the Obama administration. Congress is bought out by foreign governments like Israel, and they're doing the bidding for Israel. Anyone that will give them money, they now have the allegiance of our Congress. The Obama administration right now is using a pen and paper to write laws or change laws. Basically, this government is null and void. They are not working for the people at this point. They are working for themselves. They're doing it so they can get wealthier, they can get power. Period. That's it. So there's no reason to have any of these people in government, because they broke our contract with we the people. And we can see this is completely evident, and it's trickling down to the local level, and we're starting to see this all around the country. They've been violating our rights left and right with those caged-in fences to say this is where you have freedom of speech, where they put up the constitutional free zone 100 miles within the border of the country, where they say you cannot own a weapon and they infringe upon it with 2,000 plus laws, where they say, we can search your vehicle or your home at any time we want without a warrant. We can bring you to trial, and we don't have to produce the evidence. We don't have to tell you where we got it. Basically, they're in violation, and it's time to remove them. And we can see this is not just happening here in the United States. It's happening all over the world. And we see Turkey right now is putting forth new laws. I mean, we see France, we see Australia, we see Canada, and they're all putting forth these draconian laws to put troops on the ground, to stop protests, to block websites. And right now, Turkey is turning into a full-blown police state. And it's complete now. After weeks of heated debates and brawls in Parliament, Turkey's government passed a security package expanding police powers, along with an online surveillance law and a discretionary fund for the president to fund covert operations. In other words, President Erdogan was just voted himself quasi-dictatorial powers with private police force to defend him. Protesters are banned from carrying firecrackers, firebombs, iron pellets, slingshots, along with covering their faces during demonstrations. And we see this in Spain, we see it in France, where they have all the different laws like the gag law, and France has their laws. The United States is trying to put forth laws here. Some are already on the books where you can't protest like 100 feet away from a government official. You can't stand outside a government building. They will designate a free speech area for everyone. So we can see they're all putting forth all of these laws, trying to infringe on everyone's rights. Now we understand the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram. These are all groups that were created by the United States, UK, Israel, and other nations to push their agenda to get into each and every one of these countries. Because wherever China is and Russia is, and there's natural resources, this is where the United States government needs to go. So they started up Boko Haram in Nigeria. And of course, Nigerian people, the government there said, no, you can't enter our country. Actually, Nigeria has a very close relationship with China. And they said, absolutely not. We will not allow you in here. And we can see they started out with, 100 girls getting kidnapped, 100 boys being kidnapped, blowing up colleges. None of this has worked. None of this has worked. And the Nigerians have called in other African nations to help fight Boko Haram. And the Nigerian military has said that it has destroyed the headquarters of Boko Haram right now. And we can see right now that they are working together to get rid of this group that is controlled, which is a proxy army for the United States government central bankers, because their agenda is to get into each and every one of these African countries, to place a central bank in there, and to attach the dollar to their natural resources. This is what they're trying to do. They're using all different methods, regime change, terrorism, whatever they possibly can to keep the system propped up. Now, out in Ukraine, back when MH17 was shot down by the Ukrainian government, we know that the United States and NATO had satellites right above. We know they know exactly who was doing this because this was all prepared by CIA and other operatives to bring down this plane. And of course, Putin at the time was flying by with his plane, and it looks very, very similar to the Malaysian airline that was shot down. Now, were they looking to shoot him down? Maybe. But we can see it was not the southeastern people. It was not Russia. Even though the corporate media and the government, as soon as the plane went down, they screamed out, it's Russia, it's Russia, it's Russia. And then later on, that story kind of disappeared because it seemed that, no, it wasn't Russia. And they were proving it that it wasn't Russia. And the government kind of backed off, but they never made an apology or anything like that. And they continually blamed it on the southeastern people. But we can see right now that, no, it was the government. They were the ones who were controlling the plane. They were the ones who had the plane shift direction, move to a certain altitude. We see the Ukrainian government had warplanes following it. The evidence points to that it was shot down in the air. And we can see that when asked the CIA for evidence of what was going on, because the CIA said they had some type of update or they were looking into it, and they went over, a U.S. journalist, Parry, went over and said, okay, can we have the updated information? The CIA said, oh no, we don't have any other information. We can't give you any information. So all of this, as we can see, is a complete cover-up, just like every other false flag here. And as we know, the United States, Ukraine, and other nations are sworn to secrecy about what actually happened. They will not release any information. And look how long it has taken to get the information out there of what has actually happened with the MH17 and with the investigation. And right now, we know for a fact that NATO, US, all eyes were on the battle right there in Ukraine. They know exactly what happened, or they wouldn't have made this secretive pact. Now, in Ukraine, we see that Russia is urging Ukraine to lift the blockade on Donbass. Ukraine should immediately lift the blockade. It is necessary to use any available means to deliver relief aid to the people in this area. They need essentials like food, medical supplies, and it's just not reaching Donbass. And right now, the blockade is held steady. They don't want anything going in or out in this area. And why is this? Well, they're planning on a major offensive. Right now, Kiev forces have violated the Minsk agreement once again. They have moved up to 200 self-propelled artillery weapons to the area of Stanitsa, Lugansk, and we can see right now more equipment is on its way. And we understand that the U.S. House passed the resolution to aim to arm Ukraine as part of the strategy to get Russia. The United States House of Representatives passed a resolution, and we know it was a majority vote of 348 to 48. The bill was actually titled, "Calling on the President to provide Ukraine with military assistance to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity." The resolution stated that the Russian Federation under Putin has engaged in relentless political, economic, and military aggression to subvert the independence and violate the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which includes the illegal and forcible occupation of Crimea by Russian military and security forces, which is completely the opposite of what happened. The United States had a coup d'etat. They're the ones who brought in paid mercenaries. They're the ones who started this all up. The people in Crimea had a referendum. They voted away. There were no troops in there that forced anything. And Russia has not been involved in the battle in Ukraine. Actually, the United States has and the UK has. And we can see right now, the resolution went on to claim that Russian aggression against Ukraine is the most visible and recent manifestation of a revisionist Kremlin strategy to redraw international borders, impose its will on its neighbors, including NATO allies. Actually, isn't this what they are actually doing? Redrawing the borders and pushing aggression? Actually, everything they're talking about is what they are doing. They are pushing war. And we know the president is looking at everything saying, "Oh, I don't know if I'm going to bring in lethal weapons to Ukraine." Well, guess what? Apparently, Obama, even though he hasn't made up his mind, it seems that weapons now are moving into Ukraine. A follower of Italy's Silvio Berlusconi, even the leader of Austria's anti-immigrant Freedom Party, are shocked and appalled by Obama's actions. Heinz Christian Strache, leader of Austria's Freedom Party, posted online a photo alleged to be of Bradley tanks now on rail cars in Linz, Austria, en route to Ukraine. And his estimate is about 50 of them. And this is where the train is headed. So we can see they are bringing in lethal weapons at this time. And we know they've been bringing in weapons all along. And we know that more weapons are on their way. And we can see they are definitely preparing for a major offensive. And I do believe that this offensive is going to occur late spring, early summer, at the latest. I would be surprised if it doesn't happen. The only way this could not happen is if there was a civil war inside of Ukraine of oligarchs and something else happens inside Ukraine and the U.S. says, okay, we're done here. Enough is enough. But the way they act and what they do, it doesn't seem like they ever give up. They never admit that they're wrong. And it seems like they're going to be pushing war as hard as they possibly can, unless the people can take back the country on their own and kick out all the puppet governments, just like what's happening in Yemen, in Libya, in Lebanon. Crimea says, listen, if Russia wants to put nuclear weapons on Crimea, we will allow it. Now, it doesn't mean that Russia's going to do this. And again, we have to remember Crimea is part of Russia. So Russia can put nuclear weapons wherever they want as long as it's on Russian soil. And the United States really can't say much about this. But of course they will. But we can see that they definitely have the ability to do so. And of course, you know why they're saying this, because they're looking at the situation. They're looking at NATO and saying if push comes to shove, we will place nuclear weapons on Crimea to protect Russia. Because we can see that they're continually pushing war. And the U.S. government central bankers will not stop. They're going to continually push until they get what they want. And what they want is the southeastern portion of Ukraine and Crimea. We see they've been parading a convoy of military equipment all through the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, to show the power of the United States. And of course, this is a propaganda stunt to show that, yes, look at all the weapons. We are ready. You are protected. And as we know, they're having military drills ongoing in all of these countries. Now, out in Israel, Israel continually says that they do not have any nuclear weapons whatsoever. And there was a report which was declassified detailing Israel's nuclear program. The U.S. government has chosen to declassify a top secret document that pulls the lid off of Israel's nuclear weapons program. And according to this document, which was written in 1987, was released in early February, it is believed to be the first time the U.S. has publicly acknowledged Israel has nuclear arms. The 386-page document provides a detailed breakdown of how Israel developed nuclear weapons in the 70s and 80s. Israel is developing the kind of codes which will enable them to make hydrogen bombs. So basically, they already have it right now. So we can see right now, they have nuclear weapons, and there is a problem with this. Because when we look at this, we see that they have nuclear weapons, they don't have any IAEA inspections, and they have not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And if you notice, everything that they've been talking about, how Iran is keeping their nuclear project, their nuclear weapon project a secret, and they're making nuclear weapons, well, basically it's the opposite. This is what Israel has been doing. And because of this, under the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, which was amended by the Symington Amendment, Section 669 of the FAA in 1976, it banned U.S. economic and military assistance and export credits to countries that deliver or receive, acquire, or transfer nuclear enrichment technology when they do not comply with IAEA regulation and inspections. This provision, as amended, is now contained in Section 101 of the Arms Export Control Act, AECA. The Glenn Amendment, Section 670, was later adopted in 1977 and provided the same sanctions against countries that acquire or transfer nuclear reprocessing technology or explode or transfer a nuclear device. This provision, as amended, is now contained in Section 102 of the Arms Export Control Act. And as of right now, all the money, all the support to Israel should be returned, because the U.S. government is not allowed to give funds to Israel because they have a nuclear program, they have a nuclear weapon, and there are no inspections, and they haven't signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But if you look at Iran, they have inspections, and they have signed the treaty. And all this time, Israel has been keeping their program a complete secret. Now, out in Yemen, as we said yesterday, it is a double standard right now, because Saudi Arabia, which is controlled by the U.S. government, central bankers, is in Yemen trying to remove the people from government and put back the puppet government. And in Ukraine, we had the opposite. The U.S. backed the People for Democracy to overthrow the government there. Well, the reason for this is because in Ukraine, they wanted to remove the government there and place their puppet government in. In Yemen, they want to remove the people and place their puppet government back. And Russia is out there saying the U.S. approaches toward the ousted Yemeni president and the former president of Ukraine represent a double standard. Of course it's a double standard. They only do what they want to do. They don't care about freedom, democracy. All that is BS. Their agenda is to maintain control of the countries with their puppet governments. And we see that Saudi Arabia is continually bombing Yemen. They have set up a naval blockade, blocking Yemeni ports, including Aden. And they're continually firing on Yemen. We see Iran is out there once again saying that a possible ground operation in Yemen will not work. This will be a big mistake of Saudi Arabia. Their first mistake was the campaign of airstrikes. And of course they went into a nation that did not do anything to Saudi Arabia. Absolutely nothing. The second would be the introduction of a ground force. A direct invasion of Yemen will not work because history has shown us that no country is able to obtain their interest in Yemen. And we know that they have lots of weapons. They have rocket-propelled grenade systems. It was all left there by the Soviet Union. And the Yemenis the Iranian speaker is saying that the Yemenis have enough weapons to defend themselves. And I believe they do. I think the people are going to band together saying, listen, you're bombing everybody here. And eventually what's going to happen, and as we've seen, they're chanting against Saudi Arabia, that as the country comes together and has the push towards relieving themselves of a foreign invader, they will be victorious. Because Saudi Arabia is just coming in for no reason whatsoever. Just to maintain the puppet regime in Yemen under the direct control of the United States government central bankers. And the U.S. confirms their involvement in coordinating the Saudi attack on Yemen. The White House has confirmed today that they are in contact with Saudi Arabia. They drew up the plans. They coordinated. They have ongoing intelligence. All of it is being done and orchestrated by the United States. And we said in the past that they were going to go into these countries. When things get out of hand, we know that eventually the United States was going to go in. Now, they can't invade on their own because what would be the reasoning? They don't have the authorization for war. They're trying to get that passed. So right now, the White House is saying that, yes, even though this is happening all in Yemen, our model for counterterrorism and everything that we've done is still a success in Yemen. Well, I don't know what they're looking at, but it's a complete failure. Putting in the puppet government has failed. The people figured it out. Assad is out there, and he is saying, wait a minute, something is going on here. The alliance of 60 countries declaring plans to finish the Islamic State is not serious, he's saying. Some of its members would prefer to retain the terrorist force to blackmail different countries. The rate of airstrikes conducted by the anti-ISIS coalition member states, some of which are rich and advanced, is only about 10 raids a day on the territory of both Syria and Iraq. He says the Syrian Air Force, which is very small in comparison to this coalition, conducts in a single day many times the number of the airstrikes conducted by a coalition which includes 60 countries. He says this doesn't make sense. And why is their territory expanding? Wait a minute. They really don't want to get rid of the Islamic State. He is finally waking up and seeing that, no, this plan is to get him. And he says they want to turn us into puppets. I do not think that the West has a political solution. It does not want one. When I say the West, I'm primarily referring to the US, France, the UK, and other secondary countries. They are coming after him. And he's starting to realize, and I know Russia has already realized, that they're not going after terrorism. They're setting it up so they can go after Assad and get into Syria. Period. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.